announcements, and I add two more announcements to what he mentioned. Inshallah, we've been doing this Friday program for over a year now, and we have the intention to add onto it a Sunday program that will be bi-weekly inshallah, and it will be beginning in February. This program was meant to be lighter. That's why we chose the subject of stories of our past, so that it's not too complicated for people to follow along with, and that it's suitable for people of all ages, and also so that we can add a social component to it. And we've been a little bit negligent of the social aspects of the community hub, but inshallah we have the intention to revive this bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And the Sunday program that we're going to be starting is going to be addressing hot topic issues about real faith struggles. It's not going to be every Sunday, it's going to be on a bi-weekly schedule, so that it doesn't become too burdensome for people to follow along with. So we'll have the Shaykh Qatanani's lecture on a bi-weekly schedule, and this program, this new Sunday program, we're going to call it the Sunday Forum, is also going to be on a bi-weekly schedule, addressing faith struggles and hot topic issues, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And the other thing that we're going to be starting up in the beginning of February in the masjid is the next course, which is going to be about an introduction to the Sunnah. What is Hadith? What is the Sunnah of a Prophet ﷺ? What's the merit of Hadith in relation to the Quran? What's the merit of the statements of the companions, of the statements of the successors, the Tabi'een? What is Hadith grading? What's the history of compilation of Hadith? What are the main books of Hadith? These are a number of things that we will be discussing in this course that will be beginning in about 2 weeks inshaAllah ta'ala. We're going to have a flyer, and you can register for the course at your convenience. So, for the community hub, for the past several meetings, we've been discussing the life of Sayyidina Abu Bakr and then the life of Sayyidina Umar. Sayyidina Umar, we've given 3 talks about his life so far, and tonight is the 4th one. And as we said, this community hub is meant to be simple and light and easy to follow along with. And for this reason, we're not going to be going into a lot of the details of the life of Sayyidina Umar. As we said, one of the most critical points in our history was the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar. The greatest expansion of the Muslim Ummah happened during the Khilafah of Umar. And there are so many details that can be addressed in this regard. But because of the nature of this meeting, we're not going to get into most of that. We're going to leave most of what's relevant to the battles and historic expansion and so on and so forth. And you can read it on your own. It could be presented in a course by itself. But for our purposes here in the Community Hub, we're not going to go into those details. And I told you guys before, the book that I've been explaining from was a book titled The Life of Umar, by Dr. Ali As-Sallabi. It's translated into English and published by the International Islamic Publishing House. It's originally written in Arabic. So if you find yourself very interested in Islamic history and would like to read about the nuances and the details, that's a good place to find the details of the life of Sayyidina Umar. We only have 2 more talks about Sayyidina Umar's life, today and next week's talk. After we finish the life of Sayyidina Umar, I elect to no longer go into grave detail in the lives of the companions. There's 2 other companions of the Prophet ﷺ that have a really long life story, and that is Sayyidina Uthman and Sayyidina Ali. And that is because they took charge of the Muslims' affairs, and they were khulafa, and a lot of things happened under their reign. So we're going to be discussing their lives in general. And then after that, all of the other companions, we're going to be giving them individual one lecture talks in the Community Hub, and just drawing basic lessons from their life, just to keep it easy on the audience and easy to follow along with, and more practical for our purposes. So the 2 parts that are left in the life of Sayyidina Umar, today we're going to speak a little bit about the Muslim expansion, and next time we're going to speak about the fiqh of Umar, and how he developed a full-fledged functioning state, and some of the aspects of that, some of the things that he implemented during his Khilafah that became a model of leadership for centuries to come. As we said last time, Sayyidina Umar was a great leader, to the extent that he was even recognized by non-Muslims. The model of his leadership intrigued even non-Muslims in the past century, to the extent that one of them, Michael Hart, in his book 100 Greatest Leaders of All Time, he named him the 52nd greatest leader of all time, number 52. He named our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ number 1. Sayyidina Umar, he named him 52. Before naming Julius Caesar or anyone of the sort, or Charlemagne, or any of those, or even Napoleon, he named before all of these Sayyidina Umar Ibn Al-khattab. So this is something we're going to discuss next time, the fiqh of Umar, and how he created a unique and ideal model of a state, of an Islamic state. So, speaking about the Muslim expansion, the maximum forces of Umar's armies were between 12 and 15,000 soldiers. And the things that they undertook during his reign were so mind-blowing that it cannot be described anything short of a miracle. Now, people who do not believe in miracles, do not believe in mu'jizat, will give all types of explanations as to how Umar and the companions were able to do what they did. They will say that the Byzantines were disputing among themselves to begin with, and how the Egyptians, when Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As came to conquer Egypt, were in quarrels, religious quarrels and religious disputes, and that's why they quickly fell to the Muslim conquest, and so on and so forth. But for us as Muslims, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who designs the affairs in this life. He sets the stage for what He wants to happen as He wants it to happen. You will find some people, for example, that they will say that the reason why the Prophet ﷺ and the companions were able to win in Al-Ahzab, in the Battle of the Trenches, was because a storm that affected the enemies more than it affected the Muslims inside the city. Some people, those who believe only in materialism and disbelieve in miracles, that's their interpretation. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ جاءتكم جنود فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا وجنودا لم تروها. O you who believe, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings upon you. When an army came and sieged Medina, and we sent upon them winds and soldiers you do not see. The soldiers that, quote unquote, you do not see of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the soldiers that He has put in place to implement His design and His will. وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَى أَمْرِهِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And Allah's will is the will that will overpower all other wills. But most people, they don't understand and they don't contemplate. We believe these storms, these winds, everything, even nature in itself, is all a tool of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do what He sees fit, when He sees fit, how He sees fit. And that's what happened during the time of Sayyidina Umar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about this phenomenon in the Quran actually. In the story of Talut, it's mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا فَصَلَ طَالُوتُ بِالْجُنُودِ قَالَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مُبْتَلِيكُم بِنَهَرٍ فَمَنْ شَرِبَ مِنْهُ فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested Saul and those who followed him with the river, and some of them drank and some of them did not drink, and those who did not drink continued to follow, and then they were small in number. They started off with a huge and massive amount, a huge force, but then it was reduced because of all the trials that the army faced to a small number. What was the reaction of the believers? قال الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقو الله كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله والله مع الصابرين. They said, how often has history shown us that a small group was able to defeat a large group by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and by the will of Allah. So this is what happened during the time of Sayyidina Umar. They did not have a huge force. When Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As entered Egypt, how many soldiers do you think he had with him? How many soldiers? He only had 4,000 soldiers. You see Egypt as big as it is today. He only had 4,000 companions along with him entering the biggest or the most populated Arab state in the whole Arab world. 4,000 soldiers. That's how many soldiers entered with him into Egypt. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for Sayyidina Umar that great things happened under his reign. Now there was a number of lands conquered during his reign. Just to give you an overview, the Muslims during the time of Sayyidina Umar reached as far as Bilad al-Sind, which is known as Pakistan. They reached Pakistan during the time of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Al-khattab. They also reached Persia, they reached Azerbaijan, they reached Sham, they reached Egypt, Jerusalem, Sudan, Libya. All of this was during the time of who? During the time of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Al-khattab. And it continued during the time of Sayyidina Uthman until the Muslims in the Umayyad dynasty, which was the first dynasty after the Khulafa al-Rashidun, they reached Al-Andalus. Andalus, what is Al-Andalus? Spain, right? That's when the Muslims entered Al-Andalus during the Umayyad dynasty. Okay, so during the time of Sayyidina Umar, they went as far as Libya, Sudan, Jerusalem, Sham, Egypt. And there were many battles that happened during the time of Sayyidina Umar. The conquest of Jerusalem, the conquest of Egypt, also the battles of Al-Qadisiyah and against Al-Hurmuzan and so on and so forth. All of these conquests of Persia and Greater Persia happened during the time of Sayyidina Umar. And how true the statement of Ibn Mas'ud is when he said, ما زلنا أعزة منذ أن دخل عمر الإسلام. We have ever been in Izzah since Umar entered into Islam. As we mentioned in the first lecture, Islam became public during the time of Sayyidina Umar when he became Muslim. When he became Muslim, that's when Islam went public. Before, it was secret. Islam spread to far off lands during the time of Sayyidina Umar, and that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to make him a sign of honor and justice and wisdom for the ummah from that time to this very day. Okay, so the leaders of Sayyidina Umar. Sayyidina Umar chose as his leaders the early Muhajirun. The first Muslims were the ones he sent as leaders on these various conquests. He sent Abu Ubaidah, Amir ibn al-Jarrah, to the conquests of Sham. What is Sham? Sham is Greater Syria. Tamam? And he sent Sayyidina Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas to Al-Iraq. And he sent Zubayr ibn al-Awwam with Amr ibn al-As to Egypt. The other thing that Sayyidina Umar did was he appointed a number of the Bani Umayyah because they were naturally born leaders. These were the sons of who? Sayyidina Abu Sufyan. And as you know, Abu Sufyan was one of the nobles and leaders of Quraysh before his Islam. And after his Islam and the Islam of his children, these were naturally born leaders, and Sayyidina Umar elected a number of them to hold political positions and be governors over the Muslims. One of these is Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, not Ibn Muawiyah. Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, he appointed him as the governor of Syria. Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan was the older brother of Sayyidina Muawiyah. Sayyidina Muawiyah, after Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan passed away, Sayyidina Muawiyah then became the governor of Syria, and he stayed there until his passing for many years to come after Sayyidina Umar passed away as well. So the conquests of Sham, when did they begin? As we said during the story of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, the conquests of Sham began during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr. Actually, one of the decisive battles was Ma'rakat al-Yarmouk. Alright, Ma'rakat al-Yarmouk happened during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu ardah. And the leader of the Muslims at the time in the battle of al-Yarmouk was Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid. So he was the one who led the campaign against the Byzantines in Greater Syria. But when Sayyidina Umar became Khalifa, he decided to replace Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid. And instead he put who? Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn al-Jarrah. And one might ask, well, why did he replace Sayyidina Khalid? Sayfullah al-Maslul. The Sayyidina Khalid, as you know, he was described and nicknamed the sword of Allah because of his brilliance in military expertise and military strategy. He was referred to as the sword of Allah. So why did he replace the sword of Allah with Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn al-Jarrah? Some of the historians mentioned that he did this because he did not want the Muslims to take Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid as a quote-unquote good luck charm. That whenever Sayyidina Khalid is in charge, we could just rely upon him. He always wins. We're going to rely upon Khalid, and Khalid is the only one who could get the job done. Because you know what, brothers and sisters? Our deen teaches us this message is never dependent on one person. It's never. If I go, someone else will replace me. If you go, someone else will come in your stead. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His book, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you turn away, Allah will replace another people instead of you. This message will go on with you or without you. يَمُنُّونَ عَلَيْكَ أَنْ أَسْلَمُوا قُلْ لَا تَمُنُّوا عَلَيَّ إِسْلَامَكُمْ. They mention it as a favor and as though they have conferred their favor upon you that they accepted this message. Say, you have not done anything. You have not conferred any favor upon me. Allah is the one who conferred His favor upon you when you became a Muslim. So, this is why Sayyidina Umar, according to some, changed the leadership from Sayyidina Khalid to Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn al-Jarrah. What happened to Sayyidina Khalid after he was demoted? He stayed in the army. In fact, Abu Ubaidah did not want to tell him that Sayyidina Umar replaced you. And he initially kept it going, and he wanted to sort of deal with it discreetly. But Sayyidina Khalid ended up finding out, and he reprimanded Abu Ubaidah. Why didn't you tell me? I am just a man among the Muslims, whether I am the leader or I am the follower. And he continued and he supported the Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah in his leadership, and he was his right-hand man. So, the conquests of Sham. Now, Damascus, which is often referred to as a Sham today, even though a Sham is larger than Damascus, it's all of greater Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and what we know as Syria today. This is all considered a Sham. Damascus was one of the cities that was conquered during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar. And this is one of the oldest inhabited cities. It's actually goes back to around 6,000 years old by many nations before the Muslims and before the Byzantines before that. And this was a critical city. Damascus was a very critical city because it was the place where it was an intersection of a number of trade routes. Back in the day, they didn't have ease of travel like we have today with ships and with airplanes and with freighters and all that other stuff. They didn't have that. What they had was the trade routes. The merchants would follow these routes. Syria was that intersection between Egypt, between Europe, and between Turkey and all those other places. It was an intersection of a number of trade routes. And it came under Muslim rule in the year 14 after Hijrah. The 14 after Hijrah, during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar. Now, usually, during this Muslim expansion, wherever the Muslims would go, they would build small cities around the mainland they conquered. And the Muslims would not actually settle in those main cities that they conquered. And there's a number of reasons why this was. Like, so for example, one garrison city was Al-Kufa. Al-Kufa is in Iraq now. And it was considered, a very big and vibrant city later on. But initially, it was a garrison city where the Muslims who conquered those parts of Iraq established their presence there. Now, the reason why the Muslims didn't usually settle down was, one, they didn't want the residents to feel under occupation. Now, the Muslim conquests was not an occupation. Now you see the image of, for example, the Israelis in Palestine and how they have a visual presence in the life of the Palestinians. Muslim expansion was not motivated by this idea of occupation. Rather, it was more of giving the people a sense of liberation. And you'll see this through the examples of Jerusalem and Egypt, inshallah, as we'll mention before we close today. And also the second reason, so one is so that they don't feel that they're occupied. They have these occupiers controlling every aspect of their everyday life. No, they would appoint from among the people, the residents of the town, their leadership, and those people who take charge of their day-to-day affairs. So they don't feel that they're occupied by an outside force. Another reason was because Sayyidina Umar did not want the Muslims to settle down in these cities. He wanted them to continue on their mission of spreading this message to as far lands as they possibly could, and giving access to Islam to as many people as they could. Because like we said, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Islam was not known to the greater world at the time. It was something in Arabia, and the news of Arabia did not concern the two superpowers of the time. Persia, the Persian Empire, and the Byzantine Empire, they did not care about what happened in Arabia, because it was just a bunch of qaba'il and a desolate desert land, and it was just a bunch of tribes. Did not have any resources. They did not have petrol at the time, as we said before, and people could care less about it. So that's why this message of Islam did not spread during earlier times, during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr or during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But the difference is, when they conquered Damascus in the year 14, many Muslims actually settled in Damascus because of its critical place in the heart of the Ummah, as it became to this day. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an yufarrij an al-Sham wa ahl al-Sham. It holds a critical place in the heart of the Ummah, at the center of this Ummah. And it was a very strategic city at the time as well. Now, what happened later on is they went on to the conquest of Jerusalem. So Damascus came under Muslim rule in the year 14. Jerusalem came under Muslim rule in the year 16 in Rabi' al-Awwal. And the conquest of Jerusalem was actually mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. the Fath al-Bayt al-Maqdis min alamat yawm al-Qiyamah. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in hadith, it's in Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, "U'dud sittan bayna yaday as-sa'a, mawti." Count 6 signs from the signs of the hour. One of the signs of the Day of Judgment was the passing of our Prophet ﷺ. This hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari. Mawti, thumma fathu Bayt al-Maqdis. Then the conquest of Jerusalem after my death. Thumma mutani ya'khudhu fikum kaqi'as al-ghanam. Then he mentioned a plague that will inflict severe damage upon you and take so many lives. And in fact, that plague, the scholars they say, was ta'un amwas, that took the lives of tens of thousands of people at the time, and many among them were among the Muslims and even among the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he mentions another sign of the hour, that wealth will become so plentiful, ثم استفاضة المال حتى يعطى الرجل 100 دينار فيظل ساخطا. Then wealth will become so prevalent among people that an individual will be given 100 gold coins, 100 dinars, and he will remain upset and feel like he does not have enough, and feel like he's poor and he's in need of support. Right? This is another sign of the hour. And then he goes on to mention a few others. I won't digress too far with mentioning those others. But anyway, the conquest of Jerusalem, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, was one of the signs of the hour. And when the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, a very emotional scene happened, and I'll mention this. I felt this very powerful. Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu ardah, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he left Medina because he could not stand to be in the presence of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, the one he held so dear to his heart for many years, and see his grave there. He could not stand to live in Medina. So he asked Sayyidina Abu Bakr's permission to leave Medina, and he went to Ash-Sham. And later on, after some time, Sayyidina Abu Bakr asked Bilal, "Lima la tu'adhin?" Why don't you make adhan anymore? Why have you stopped making adhan? You used to have the most beautiful voice in adhan during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He took an oath upon himself not to make adhan after the passing of the Prophet ever again. And he said in response to Sayyidina Abu Bakr, "Ma kuntu arfa'u sawti mu'adhinan illa lahu sallallahu alaihi wasallam." He said, "I never made adhan for anyone else but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it pains me too much to make adhan again for anyone after him." But there was a few exceptions that Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu made. And one of those exceptions was in the conquest of Jerusalem. And that is that when Sayyidina Bilal, it's mentioned in the books, the history books, when Sayyidina Bilal went to Ash-Sham, he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his sleep. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, "Hajartana ya Bilal min az-ziyara." It's been a long time since you've come to visit us. When he awoke from this dream, he woke crying, and he went to Medina directly. And when he came into Medina, the companions saw him, and they hugged and embraced him, and they all began crying because they remembered the days of the Prophet ﷺ. Then during the conquest of Jerusalem, after Sayyidina Umar received the keys to the city, and the time for Dhuhr prayers came, Sayyidina Umar asked Bilal, "Ya Bilal, qum fa'adhin." And so he asked Bilal, "Stand up and make adhan." So Bilal told him, "I'fini ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." Relieve me of this responsibility, O Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Sayyidina Umar insisted upon him, "Sa'altuka billahi an tu'adhin." I ask you by Allah, this is a special day. A day in which the words of our Prophet ﷺ have come true. He said the conquest of Jerusalem will happen. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the second conquest of Jerusalem and the freedom of Al-Aqsa from the hands of the oppressors and from the hands of the Zionists come again during our lifetime. Allahumma ameen. So Sayyidina Bilal, after hearing this request from Sayyidina Umar, stood up and made adhan. And everyone in that congregation began weeping and crying because they remembered with the adhan of Bilal the life of the dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ. They all began crying. فَمَا بَقِيَتْ عَيْنٌ إِلَّا بَكَتْ ذَاكَ الْيَوْمِ. Everyone in the congregation began crying because of remembering the Prophet ﷺ. Sayyidina Umar entered Jerusalem and was received by the bishop of Jerusalem. His name was Sophronius. And the bishop of Jerusalem did not want to stay under Byzantine rule. And the reason for that was because the Byzantines were very intolerant towards other strands of Christianity. Now, of course, as you know, there was a lot of reform going on in the church at the time, and there are many different sects and strands of Christianity. The Byzantines did not tolerate the practice of any other strand of Christianity except their own. So Sophronius wanted to be free of the Byzantines himself, and that's why he welcomed the coming of Sayyidina Umar. And Sayyidina Umar gave Christians as a whole their freedom to practice their religion. And there's a very famous pact that Sayyidina Umar made with the people of Jerusalem, Al-Uhda Al-Umariya or Al-Wathiqa Al-Umariya or Shurut Al-Umariya. It's called different things. And this pact actually is the source of a lot of controversy today. Okay, the things that were mentioned in this Wathiqa to the people of Jerusalem were as follows. And don't react until you hear the whole explanation, but because for our sensibilities in the 21st century, some of these things might not make sense when you first hear them. So what came in this wathiqa? Some things that don't really match with some liberal values. Okay? And that's because liberalism is not the same system as Islam's system. Okay? So first off, the ruler would provide security to all of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, Muslim and non-Muslim. That was one thing in the wathiqa. Another thing that came in the wathiqa is that the Christians were allowed to maintain their places of worship, but they were not allowed to build new places of worship. Okay? So the first gasp. They were not allowed to build new places of worship, but they were allowed to maintain their current places of worship. And the other thing was that Sayyidina Umar made it a point to the Muslims that they should not even consider coming anywhere near these sacred places of worship and tarnishing them in any way. And that's when he first came in. When he first came in, he was received by this bishop, Sophronius, and he was taken to one of the most sacred sites of Christendom. And that is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's where Christians believe that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam died and was resurrected. Okay? So it's a very sacred place for Christians. And when the time of prayer came, the bishop told Sayyidina Umar, why don't you pray inside the church? Sayyidina Umar said, no, I will not pray inside the church because I don't want a day to come when Muslims will turn this church into a mosque in my memory. So he went out of the church and a little bit at a distance, and he prayed in a place that now became a masjid. It actually became a masjid. It's called Masjid Umar, Masjid Sayyidina Umar. And it's across the street from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. When the bishop saw the character of Sayyidina Umar, he gave him the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And Sayyidina Umar gave these keys to one of the Muslims of the city, and these keys to this day have stayed in the family of that man, the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre from the time of Sayyidina Umar to this day. And there's a lot of documentaries that you can find that mention this and so on and so forth. So that was the character of the Muslims at the time. But there was other things that were controversial to our sensibilities in the wathiqa. They were not allowed to publicly propagate Christianity in the city of Jerusalem. Because we as Muslims, we believe, although we believe in coexisting and living side by side by people of other faiths, we believe that Islam is the truth. And we should not shy away from this declaration as Muslims. We believe Islam is the truth. And the other religions are false. And so hence, in this wathiqa came that it's not allowed for the Christians to publicly propagate their religion. Now, this wathiqa, this pact by Sayyidina Umar, is often used by Islamophobes to raise controversy around Islam's tolerance. However, if you try to compare this wathiqa that's over 1,000 years old, this pact that's over 1,000 years old, to the sensibilities of the 21st century, to a liberal framework, then of course it'll never be seen as what it actually was, which was a statement of justice and tolerance. But when you compare it to the model of the time, and you compare it to what the Christians themselves, the Jews themselves, had to endure under rule, the Byzantine rule and other rules, other authorities other than the authority of Islam, you will see its justice. In fact, the Jews, they saw their golden days in the Muslim leadership in Morocco. And that's where they found their freedom to practice. And those are considered, that's the golden era of Judaism, is under Muslim rule and the freedom that they had there. So it's a mistake to compare Umar's pact to, for example, the Geneva Convention. Because Islam's law, as we said, they're not like liberal laws. For example, in liberal laws, they don't believe that the practice of religion has a place in public society, in public affairs. But for us as Muslims, we believe that that's the center of what directs public discourse. So for secular law, everyone can believe whatever they want and no one should get involved in any way. Alright? Because religion has no weight when it comes to public discourse. But for Islam, no. What directs the public discourse is the teachings of the faith. So hence, of course, you're definitely going to find differences between liberal philosophy and Islamic philosophy. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ, this is not takhyir. This is not Allah giving just mere choice. Go ahead, believe in whatever you want. Whoever wants to believe, let him believe. And whoever wants to disbelieve, let him disbelieve. Yes, there's no compulsion in religion. Absolutely. No one can be forced to change one religion for another religion. However, our deen teaches that whatever you choose, your choices have consequences. We believe that if you choose anything other than the truth, then you'll be called to account for what you chose in this dunya. And you know what? In fact, this is not just pre-modern issues. This is not pre-modern intolerance. Oh, look at it. Islam treated non-Muslims as secondary citizens or second-class citizens. No, not the case at all. People always do this. Every time, every place, every system, every philosophy has its biases. Even this day, into this day, there are a lot of biases in the nation-state model. Now we live in the age of the nation-state model. Some of the biases in our time, for example, if you're born as an American citizen in this country, you have far more rights than if you were to come into this country with a visa. It's natural. It's natural. If you come into this country with a visa, you're not like a natural-born citizen. You are considered in a completely different light. And I actually saw this at the airport one time. And it was very, very interesting because the double standards again. The double standards, they just changed. But everyone has their biases. Every system has their biases. So I was in the airport one time and I was in customs awaiting to be questioned. Don't ask why I was awaiting to be questioned. But I was awaiting to be questioned in customs. And they were questioning another woman that was coming to visit this country on a visa. And she was not American, she was European. And the man was asking her, the officer was asking her very particular questions. How long are you going to stay here? Where are you going to stay? Why are you coming? And the woman was getting frustrated. Why all these questions? Does it make any difference if I have an American visa, American passport or any other passport? And he looked at her and he said, oh yes. It makes a very big difference if you have an American passport or if you don't. So clearly, there's double standards. Even immigrants, what are they referred to? They're referred to as aliens. You're either a documented quote-unquote alien or an illegal alien, right? So these xenophobic terms towards immigrants even persist to this day. Okay, so every system and every model has its biases. If it was of the past, some of the biases that would give the Muslims rights, certain rights that were not given to people of other faiths to propagate their religion because we believe our religion is truth and the other religions are falsehood? Yes. Or it was other things on other bases, on other nationalistic bases, or so on and so forth. So that's about the wathiqa or al-uhda al-umariyah, this pact between Sayyidina Umar and the people of Jerusalem. It was a symbol of tolerance and justice, especially for those times. And the Christians of Jerusalem embraced this freedom that they were given under Muslim rule. Who did we say led the Muslim expansion into Greater Syria? Who was it? Again? No, not Khalid ibn Walid. That was during the time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr. He was replaced by who? Abu Ubaidah. Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah passed away shortly after the conquest of Jerusalem, 2 years after it. He passed away in the plague of Amwas. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned plagues in a few ahadith. He says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَذَابًا يَبْعَثُهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ فَجَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ رَحْمَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He said that Allah would send plagues upon nations as a form of punishment. But He has made it a form of mercy for the believers. And that's because if you are patient and you die because of a plague or an outbreak, you are given the merit of what? The shaheed. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, لَيْسَ مِنْ عَبْدٍ يَقَعُ فِي الطَّاعُونِ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ صَابِرًا أَنَّهُ لَنْ يُصِيبَهُ إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ إِلَّا كَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ الشَّهِيدِ. Prophet ﷺ said, any individual who is in a land stricken by a plague and remains in his land patient, knowing with full certainty that nothing will happen to him except by Allah's will, Allah will give him the reward of the martyr and of the shaheed. Should he leave that land? Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah gave us the example of that. Sayyidina Umar, when he heard of the plague, he immediately called for Abu Ubaidah because he loved Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah. He wanted Abu Ubaidah to come back to Medina. So Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah responded, أَنَفِرُّ مِنْ قَدَرِ اللَّهِ, should we flee from the decree of Allah? So Sayyidina Umar told him, لَوْ أَنَّ غَيْرَكَ قَالَهَا, I wish someone else other than you said that. Because نَفِرُّ مِنْ قَدَرِ اللَّهِ إِلَىٰ قَدَرِ اللَّهِ, we flee from Allah's decree to Allah's decree. If you take some means to protect yourself, it doesn't mean that you're fleeing from Allah's decree, because ultimately no matter what you do, you're going to face Allah's decree. But Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah said, I will not leave Sham. And he was doing this observing the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the Prophet ﷺ instructed that if you hear of a plague in a land, don't go to that land. And if you are in that land when the plague strikes, don't leave that land. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ prohibited that you go to a land that has a ta'un in it, that has a plague or an outbreak. And He prohibited that you leave a land that has a plague or an outbreak. Why is this? Ask the people from the CDC why. The idea of what? Quarantine, right? So the Prophet ﷺ had this idea of quarantine. Because if you leave the land with a plague, what's going to happen? You might be the cause of the spread of the plague. So the Prophet ﷺ instructed, don't leave. And so Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah stayed in that land with full trust that he will not die from the plague unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it. Not everyone in the Sham and greater Syria died because of the plague. You will only meet what Allah has decreed for you. Even if everyone around you is sick, if Allah wills that you do not get sick, you will not get sick. And this is something that's very important for one to believe. Yes, be precautious, but at the same time, with your precaution, don't ever blame your sickness on someone else. No, you got sick because Allah willed it. You got sick not because you were around the baby who had the cold or the flu, because Allah had willed it. Should you be precautious? Absolutely. You should take every single precaution you possibly can. But still, with every precaution, know that if Allah wants you to get the flu, you're going to get the flu, no matter what you do. Right? But still, it's important, and this is not a call to, if you have a sick baby, doesn't mean just, hold him very closely and allow his fluids to come on your face or whatever it is. No. Or put all the babies together, or send your kids to school when they have the flu. No, I'm not saying this. Don't send your kids to school if they have the flu, please. Especially now that we're hearing in Texas, there's this deadly flu that came out. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and all our children, Allahumma ameen. But nonetheless, it's an important belief for the believer that if you get sick, it's not because of X, Y, or Z, it's because Allah wanted you to get, or because Allah decreed that you get sick. Allah decreed that you get sick. Should you be precautious? Yes, you should absolutely be precautious. Nonetheless, Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah had this belief, and that's why he did not leave Sham. And he actually addressed his companions before he passed away, and after him another one of the companions took charge of the Muslims. But in fact, a number of the well-known Muslims and well-known companions passed away during the plague. Among them is Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He's actually the one who took leadership after Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah. Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abu Ubaidah, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, a number of the other ones, they all passed away in this plague. Tens of thousands of people passed away. So that was the year 16, and that was the conquest of Jerusalem. The very last thing I'll mention today is a little bit about the conquest of Egypt. As we said, Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As asked permission to go on to Egypt, to conquer Egypt. And this was in the year 18 after Hijrah. And he went with 4,000 soldiers. And Egypt at the time was the center of intellectual learning for Christianity. That was Alexandria. It was a very important center of learning and intellectualism for Christianity at the time. And in fact, it was one of the most developed cities in all of Africa. Alexandria was one of the most developed cities in all of Africa at the time. It was, the Christians, or Egypt at the time, was led by Al-Muqawqis, and his name was Sirius. Al-Muqawqis, his name was Sirius, and he was a fanatic religious zealot. And the Coptics of Egypt despised Byzantine rule, and they wanted a solution out of it. They did not want to stay under the Byzantines' rule. And the conquest of Egypt was one of the easiest among all of the others. One of the more complicated ones was the conquest of Persia. But the conquest of Egypt happened very easily, because the people supported it. The people wanted this change. The residents of Egypt wanted this change. They were fed up with Byzantine rule. And this is actually one of the most unique conquests in our history as a whole. And that's because it's one of the longest lasting ones. From that time to this time, Egypt became a Muslim country. The Copts learned Arabic, and to this day, you'll find the Coptic Christians speaking Arabic just like all of the other Egyptians. And in fact, they'll have even some of the same expressions. You'll be shocked that they'll say things like Alhamdulillah and Salli al Nabi. They'll say all of these types of expressions that are common among Muslims. Pray Alhamdulillah and send peace and blessings upon the Prophet. They say it out of habit, not out of Iman in the Prophet ﷺ. They say it out of habit. But that's because of the influence of Islam upon Egypt. Alright, so the Copts learned Arabic, and Egypt embraced Islamic rule from the time of Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As to this very day. And there's a whole story about its conquest from the city of, they had a city called Babel, Babylon, not the Babylon of Iraq. They had a Babel of Egypt, Babylon of Egypt at the time. And Al-Fustat was one of the first Muslim cities established, and it was in what we now know as Cairo. And the Muslim expansion went from Cairo to Heliopolis, which is Ain Shams, until they finally got to Alexandria. And Alexandria was one of the most fortified cities of the time. Because again, this was a very old city. It was under Greek rule at one time, then under the Romans, then under the Byzantines. It's a very heavily fortified city. And after the fall of Alexandria, Egypt came under Muslim rule, and its first governor was Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As. There's so much to say about this Muslim expansion. I did not even touch upon the Muslim expansion into Persia. But because of the sake of time and not getting into the nitty-gritty details, I just wanted to give you a taste of one of the most significant aspects of this expansion, which was Greater Syria and then extending on into Egypt, and to give you a taste of some of those finer meanings of Islam that manifested through the character and leadership and under the reign and auspice of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardah. So with this, I will stop and I'll conclude. And if any of you guys have any questions, you can feel free. We have this number if you wanted to text your questions to there, or if you want to ask your questions directly. But as we said, next time, we won't be continuing with this discussion. We're going to be speaking a little bit about the fiqh of Umar, and about how he established a full-fledged state, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask before we close? Yeah, tafadhal.
People who were being not occupied, but people who were conquered and underneath Muslim rule, do they have to pay jizya?
Yes, so one of the things, and this is Jazakallah khair, one of the things I didn't address actually, and this is one of the other controversial things. So when we speak about Muslim expansion, one thing that is often asked about, did Islam spread by the sword? Right? And I'm going to get to jizya right now. What's your answer? Did Islam spread by the sword? Yes or no? Yes? If you say yes, raise your hand. I heard a yes in the back. Two yeses. Alright. Did everyone else, Islam spread by the sword? Your answer is no? Okay. My answer is a little bit different than the two. Well, what's intended by the question? When you say Islam was spread by the sword, or was Islam spread by the sword, what do you mean by this question? Do you mean by it that did people become acquainted with Islam better as a byproduct of Muslim expansion? And I tell you, of course. Of course, through these conquests and these futuhat, people got a chance to see Islam firsthand. How the companions lived and conducted themselves, the justice that Islam brought to their lands. As a byproduct of this, did this lead to many people entering into Islam? Certainly. Example of that is Egypt. Egypt gradually, the residents of Egypt gradually entered into Islam. Until a few hundred years ago, they actually became a majority. The Muslims became a majority. Until to this day, now you have about 90% of Egypt is Muslim. And the other 10% is Coptic. Right? Or if that, something like that. So anyway, so if you mean by it as a byproduct of Muslim expansion, people entered into Islam, yes. I would say, of course, the answer to it is yes. But if you mean by did Islam spread by the sword, were people compelled to become Muslim? And I would say no. This is very important to make this difference. You know why? Because often when people say about Islam spreading to Indonesia and Malaysia, how do they say it spread there? By trade and business. Do you think that it was just Muslims becoming good tradesmen and good businessmen, and that's what led to that whole region entering into Islam? Study the history. That's not what it was. That's a very important factor in what it was. But what happened through these trades, one of the rulers of the islands of Indonesia actually entered into Islam. And because of him entering into Islam, his influence gave the Muslims freedom to give da'wah in those islands that he ruled. Right? So it's very important that along with the message, that the message be given the freedom and be facilitated for it to spread. Now, I'll give you an example. Better to give example from overseas than over here, because here everyone has the freedom to say whatever they want. Overseas, who has the right to open a news channel? Who has the right and the freedom to spread news? Do you think that in Egypt you have like a CNN, for example? Do you think that there's a CNN in Egypt? Good luck. Good luck. No one's allowed to speak in the news anything that even remotely challenges or opposes the state. Then the people who are listening to this, what rhetoric are they getting? They're only getting one rhetoric, what the state wants them to hear. Anything else is absolutely false and cancelled out. So many people, they're influenced by what they see on the news, right? Even in our country here, many people, because you have channels like Fox News, for example, and millions of people watch it. People are influenced by what they see on Fox News. Millions of Americans are influenced by what they see about Islam on Fox News. So when you have the freedom to propagate your message, or in fact your message is sponsored by the state itself, it'll be so much more far-reaching than if you were not given that freedom and not given that space. So in fact, yes, the fact that leaders and heads of state accepted the message of Islam and gave freedom to the da'wah, this played an important role in the message spreading, and we cannot doubt this. We cannot challenge this. It wasn't just by word of mouth, me giving good da'wah to this guy and then giving good da'wah to this one. This is what happened in Medina. When the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, before he went, he had sent certain companions to speak to the leaders of the main tribes of Medina. And when those leaders entered into Islam, it became so much easier to spread the da'wah of Islam in Medina. So, was Islam spread by the sword? Don't answer with a yes or no answer. Ask another question. Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean were people compelled to believe in Islam? No. You bring me any proof in our history that shows that. If that was the case, we would not have millions of Coptics living from the time of Sayyidina Umar to this day as Coptics believing in their Christianity. Were people compelled to accept? No, they were not. But did the da'wah spread farther because of Muslim expansion? Absolutely. So it's not a yes or no answer. Getting back to your question about the jizya. Yes, there was the jizya mandated. And this is another thing that was in Al-Uhd Al-Umariyah that is exploited and misrepresented by Islamophobes. They say that the jizya, or the, I guess for me to translate it in a very inappropriate way, I would call it, if I was an Islamophobe, they would say it's the non-Muslim tax. The Islamophobes, they would call it the non-Muslim tax. Jizya was implemented on the people of Jerusalem. Now, is jizya an example of Islamic injustice? Absolutely not. In the Islamic state, one of the things that every single member of society who was well off had to do was what? They had to pay zakah. And zakah was 2.5% of your wealth. If you were a millionaire, 2.5% of $1 million is a lot of money. How much is 2.5% of a million? 25,000. That's a lot of money. If you had 10 million, it's 250,000, right? You had to pay that on a yearly basis. On a yearly basis, that's a lot of money. Okay? So, when you compare that to what jizya was, what was jizya? Not 1% even. It was one gold coin. For those who were young and able and fit, young, able, fit men who were able to serve in the army, they did not have to serve in the army. And instead, what did they do? They paid jizya. They paid jizya instead. They paid this tax that was mandated upon them instead of serving in the army. When they were old men, or they could not support themselves, or they were weak, or they did not have physical ability, they were relieved of this jizya. One gold coin. One gold coin, how much is one gold coin? One gold coin was a few grams of gold at the time, which would not be beyond a few $100s. Okay? So you compare that to the potential of paying thousands and thousands of dollars if you were a Muslim. You compare that to that. And I'll give you another example. Compare it. So in pre-modern times, they called it jizya. In modern times, what do we call it? We call it taxes. Taxes. You're paying 25% of your wealth. Imagine that. You make $75,000 a year. How much are you paying to taxes? You're paying tens of thousands of dollars to taxes if you make $75,000 a year. How much would you rather pay? One gold coin a year, or $25,000 a year for your taxes? All right? You tell me, okay? So anyway, this is what we got to do. We got to engage these issues, because we cannot continue to allow these people who understand nothing about our history continue to misrepresent our Islam. And the other thing, the biggest mistake we can do as Muslims is to try to disown our past. Oh man, Sayyidina Umar, he did not allow the Christians to build churches. Oh, I have nothing to do with this. This is complete intolerant. This is medieval perspectives and attitudes towards faith. We have nothing to do with this. Okay, no, we need to explain this and shed light upon why this is not an injustice. Why, in fact, we believe that this is something that needs to be understood in its context. We should not shy away from our past. We should not shy away from the values of our deen. We cannot allow people to continue to misconstrue this concept of jizya or any other of the other concepts that were mandated in our past. So, Jazakallah khair for the question. That's the answer to it. Wallahu alam. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? What was the what? So what was the motivation of the expansion itself? So this motivation actually began during the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ before his passing, a few years before his passing, there was the year of the caravans. The year of the caravans, sorry, not the year of the caravans, the year of the delegates, Am al-Wufud. The delegates, this is the year, 9th year after Hijrah, when the delegates from all across Arabia came to declare their Islam and announce their support of the Prophet ﷺ. And at this point, the Prophet ﷺ, just before his passing, united all of Arabia under the rule of Islam. And this is something that's never happened in the history of Arabia. Because throughout Arabia's history, it was known to be Arab tribes that always quarreled with each other and fought with each other over insignificant reasons. And at this point, the Islam was put on the map. And now it became a concern for the superpowers. Oh, we've never seen Arabia unite before for the Byzantines and for the Persians. Okay, so that's why during the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, he put together an army. And before his passing, in the years leading up to it, there were a number of military campaigns that the Prophet ﷺ sent to meet the Byzantines and the Romans. And before his passing, he put together the army of Osamah, again to go towards the Roman regions. And the reason why was this was preempting what the Prophet ﷺ knew will happen with his passing. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away, most of the Arabian Peninsula abandoned, or much of the Arabian Peninsula, I'll say, abandoned Islam. And they apostated, and a number of forces outside Arabia and within Arabia were actually considering doing away with this Islam once and for all. So to preempt this, the Prophet ﷺ put together the army of Osamah bin Zayd, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr actually sent this army after he became Khalifa, so that he makes it known that don't think that because our Prophet passed away that we've become weak and you can come and destroy our state and destroy our progress. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr, because that was the law of the time, it was either fight or be defeated. Either fight and stand for what you believe in, or be defeated. So that's what happened constantly between the Persians and the Romans for many years. For one time the Persians would fight and they would defeat the Romans. A few years later the Romans would come back and they would defeat the Persians. You either were one who stood up for what you believe in and you fought for yourself, or you were going to be crushed by your enemies. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr set the framework for this expansion. And then during the time of Sayyidina Umar, he continued it as a form of defense, if you could say, before the enemies could gather any force against the Muslims, and also as a form of da'wah. They would not pillage these lands. They would not force these lands to surrender all of their properties. No. Many of these lands actually settled with the Muslims, and they were allowed to keep their property and their possessions and their lands and everything. So it wasn't for material gain. It was to make this message, or give this message the opportunity to be spread to the corners of the earth, one, and also as a form of defense. Because again, if you were not defending yourself and your territories at the time, then your enemy is going to muster enough force and come and attack you in your own homeland. So that was just the law of the time. Allahu Alam. There was another question here.
Yeah, I just want to add something. For jizya, if those people who pay jizya, isn't this Islamic government responsible for the safety and protection against enemies? That's one of the reasons for this.
Yeah. So exactly, that's what I was trying to highlight, is that the reason why they had to pay jizya was because they were relieved from military service. They did not have to do any. But Muslims, if a war was to happen, they were required to go out and serve in the military. They were required to do that. But the non-Muslims under Muslim authority were not required to do that. Yeah, so that's another reason. Tamam. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to ask about anything relating to the talk or anything else? Any questions before we close? جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا الحق وتواصوا الصبر. And before you go, as you can see, there's tea and some snacks over there for the brothers and over there for the sisters. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.